I didn't plan on seeing my family again. That's probably the cleanest way to start this. For 2 years, I lived like they didn't exist, not out of spite, but because pretending they were still part of my life hurt more than accepting they'd cut me loose. Then, 3 weeks ago, my phone lit up with my mother's name for the first time since she told me I was no longer welcome at family gatherings. I stared at the screen long enough for it to stop ringing. A minute later, a text came through. We're planning a reunion. Everyone wants to heal. We think it would mean a lot if you spoke. I laughed out loud in my kitchen, alone, because that sentence carried more irony than anything I'd read in years. I'm Daniel. I'm 32 now. Back when everything blew up, I was 30 and still naive enough to think blood meant something unbreakable. I grew up as the older sibling, the steady one, the one who never needed much. My sister, Lily, 2 years younger than me, was always the center of gravity in our house. Not because she demanded it outright, but because everyone quietly adjusted their orbit around her. If she was upset, the day bent around it. If she made a mistake, someone else must have pushed her. If she succeeded, it was proof our family was exceptional. I learned early that my role was to absorb, not compete. The story my family tells, still tells, from what I can gather, is that I ruined Lily's reputation. They say it like I maliciously planned it, like I woke up one morning and decided to torture life for entertainment. That's the version that justified cutting me off. That's the version that let them sleep at night. What they don't like acknowledging is that reputations usually collapse because of weight already stacked on them. I didn't add the weight. I just refused to lie when it finally fell. Before everything went wrong, my life was fine. Not flashy. I worked a mid-level operations job, rented a small apartment, paid my bills on time. I showed up to birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners. I listened more than I spoke. Lily, on the other hand, had momentum. She was engaged, climbing socially, building what my parents loved to call a perfect image. They said it like it was fragile glass, something we all needed to protect. When small cracks started appearing, I noticed them before anyone else did. I said nothing. At first, the breaking point didn't come from a dramatic confrontation. It came from a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear and a lie I was expected to repeat. I remember sitting in my car afterward, hands on the steering wheel, realizing something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how I saw my sister, but in how my parents expected me to function. I was no longer just the quiet son. I was a tool, a buffer, a convenient scapegoat if things got uncomfortable. When I didn't play along, things escalated fast. There were family meetings where everyone spoke slowly, like I was confused. There were texts reminding me of everything we've done for you. There were pointed questions about my loyalty. The final conversation happened at my parents' dining table. My father stared straight ahead and said, "If you can't support your sister, you're choosing to stand against this family." My mother cried, but didn't contradict him. Lily didn't look at me at all. I said I wouldn't lie. That was it. I packed my jacket, walked out, and by the end of the week, I was blocked on everything that mattered. The first few months after that were rough in ways I didn't expect. Not dramatic, just hollow. I'd reach for my phone out of habit when something good or bad happened, then remember there was no one on the other end anymore. Holidays felt strange, like days off that forgot their purpose. I kept working, kept my head down. I didn't talk about my family much, because explaining why you no longer have one makes people uncomfortable. Eventually, I stopped trying. What I did instead was rebuild quietly. I took a better job offer in a different city, nothing flashy, just more stable. I saved aggressively. I stopped checking my sister's social media after the third time I caught myself spiraling. I learned how peaceful it could be to make decisions without imagining my parents' reactions. A year ago, I bought a small house. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I stood in the empty living room the first night, eating takeout on the floor, and realized I felt safe for the first time in a long time. They didn't know any of this. As far as my family was concerned, I'd disappeared, and I was okay with that. I didn't reach out. I didn't correct the narrative. Let them believe whatever version made them comfortable. Silence was easier than fighting people who'd already decided you were the villain. Which brings me back to the reunion. The text messages started slowly after my mother's initial outreach. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since the fallout sent a cautious, "Hey stranger." My aunt called and left a voicemail about how time changes things. Then came the details: a big family reunion, rented venue, catered food. My parents were paying for everything. They wanted it to be symbolic. A reset. And they specifically wanted me there, not just present, but involved. My mother said, it would help everyone move on if you shared your side. Just enough to clear the air. That phrase stuck with me. Clear the air. As if the room had simply grown stuffy, not toxic. I asked one question before agreeing. I texted my mother, does Lily know you want me to speak? There was a long pause before the reply came. She knows you'll be there. We think it's best if everything happens naturally. That should have been my warning sign. Instead, I felt something colder settle in. Not anger. Resolve. I said yes. From that moment on, the tone shifted. My parents suddenly sounded relieved, almost buoyant. Logistics followed. Date, location, guest list. I noticed something else too. No one apologized. Not once. The assumption was that my presence itself was the olive branch. That I should be grateful for the invitation, grateful for the chance to rejoin. As the reunion approached, the messages grew more frequent. My mother asked what I planned to say. My father suggested I keep it positive. An uncle joked that I should avoid reopening old wounds. Lily stayed silent. Not a text, not a call, which told me more than anything else could. The night before the reunion, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous about seeing them, but because I realized how asymmetrical the situation was. They thought they were inviting back a version of me frozen in time, confused, defensive, eager for approval. They had no idea who I'd become in their absence. And they definitely didn't know what other people already knew. When I pulled into the venue parking lot the next afternoon, I sat in my car for a moment, watching relatives arrive in clusters, laughing, hugging. From the outside, it looked like any other family gathering. Warm. Familiar. I recognized Lily's car near the entrance. Newer than the last one I'd seen her drive. My parents' SUV was parked front and center. I took a breath, stepped out, and walked toward the doors. Inside, the room buzzed with small talk and clinking glasses. A few heads turned when they saw me. Conversations paused, then resumed at a lower volume. My mother spotted me and rushed over, arms already outstretched, tears in her eyes like we were reenacting a scene she'd rehearsed. Daniel, she said, squeezing me tight. I'm so glad you came. Across the room, I finally saw my sister look up. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before her expression shifted. Not anger, not relief, but something sharper. Calculation. The first hour of the reunion passed the way these things always do. Too much noise, too many forced smiles, people pretending nothing fractured in the first place. I moved through the room slowly, shaking hands, accepting brief hugs from relatives who looked at me like I was a risky conversation topic. Everyone was polite. That politeness had an edge to it, like glass smooth, just enough not to cut unless you press too hard. My parents stayed close, especially my mother. She kept touching my arm, guiding me from group to group, introducing me like I was a guest of honor instead of the son they'd erased. This is Daniel, she'd say brightly. He's doing really well now. I noticed she never said where I lived or what I did. Just really well now, like a vague improvement she didn't want examined too closely. Lily, meanwhile, was holding court at the far end of the room. She was surrounded by cousins and old family friends, laughing louder than necessary, flipping her hair the way she always did when she wanted attention anchored on her. Every few minutes, she'd glance over at me. Not openly. Sideways. Checking to see if I was watching. I wasn't sure what she expected to find on my face. Shame, maybe. Regret. Some silent plea for forgiveness. What she saw instead made her jaw tighten. At one point, my aunt pulled me aside near the drink table. She lowered her voice and said, "It's good of you to come back, Daniel. Your parents were devastated when you left." She said left, not were pushed out. I nodded and thanked her. That was the pattern. Everyone spoke as if the past were a misunderstanding, a mutual drifting apart. No one said cut off. No one said chose sides. About 40 minutes in, my father tapped a spoon against his glass. The sound carried farther than I expected. Conversations faded. Chairs turned. My mother moved to his side immediately, smiling in that practiced, serene way she used when she wanted to look united. "We just want to thank everyone for being here," my father began. "Family is important to us. Always has been. And today is about healing." Healing. Another word that sounded kind until you looked too closely at what it was covering. He went on about forgiveness, about misunderstandings, about how time gives perspective. Then he gestured toward me. "Daniel has been gracious enough to join us today. He's agreed to say a few words later. We think it's time to clear the air. There it was again. Clear the air. I felt the room subtly shift toward me. Expectations settled in, heavy and warm. People smiled encouragingly. A few nodded like they already knew what I was going to say. I caught Lily's expression then, tight, but confident. She leaned over to whisper something to our cousin Mark, who snorted softly. Whatever she was afraid of, she clearly believed it was under control. Lunch was served after that. Long tables, assigned seating. Guess where I was placed? Between my parents. Lily sat across from us, flanked by relatives who had always adored her. It felt deliberate, like a stage. My mother chatted about the food. My father asked about my job in vague terms, then quickly redirected the conversation back to Lily's upcoming plans. Engagement updates. Career talk. How proud they were. The usual rhythm snapped back into place so naturally it was almost impressive. Then Lily smiled at me. Sweet. Innocent. So, she said, loud enough for the table to hear. I guess living away from everyone gave you some perspective, huh? There it was. The first poke. I smiled back calmly. It did. She tilted her head. I'm glad you're not angry anymore. She emphasized the word just enough to suggest I'd been irrational before. A few people chuckled. My mother relaxed visibly, like Lily had defused a potential bomb. I let it go. That seemed to annoy her. As the meal went on, the comments became more pointed. Lily joked about how hard it must be to start over with nothing. She mentioned how some people can't handle pressure and disappear. Each remark was followed by a glance at our parents, as if checking that they approved. They never stopped her. Not once. At one point, my father leaned toward me and murmured, "Try not to take things personally. She's just nervous." Nervous? About what? After lunch, people mingled again. I was pulled into conversations about the city I lived in, my house. News that clearly surprised a few people. You bought? My cousin Jenna asked, eyebrows lifting. That's amazing. The word spread quickly. I noticed Lily's smile falter for the first time when she overheard someone congratulate me. She crossed the room soon after. Must be nice, she said lightly, standing beside me. Buying a house without responsibilities. I turned to her. What responsibilities are those? She laughed, but there was an edge to it now. You know? Family. Reputation. That word again. Reputation. The thing I'd supposedly destroyed. Before I could respond, my mother appeared, placing herself physically between us. Daniel, she said, voice tight but smiling. Your father wants to go over the order for speeches. Speeches. Plural. That was new. We stepped aside near the back of the room. My father joined us, holding a small stack of note cards. We thought, he said carefully, that Lily should speak first. Share her perspective. Then you can follow. It'll show unity. I looked at him. I was told I'd speak to clear the air. Yes, my mother said quickly. But this way it feels balanced. Balanced. After 2 years of silence forced on me, I hesitated just long enough for my father's expression to harden. This is a family event, he said. Not a platform. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I nodded. Fine. Lily took the microphone 15 minutes later. She looked radiant. Confident. She started with gratitude, thanking our parents, thanking everyone for supporting her during the hardest period of her life. Then she shifted. There was a time, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, when someone close to me chose to share private matters without understanding the damage it would cause. It hurt my career, my relationships, my mental health. She paused, eyes flicking to me for half a second. But I've learned that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. The room was silent. Heavy. I felt heat rise up my neck, but I stayed still. This was it. This was the narrative, polished and presented as fact. I scanned the faces around me. Sympathy. Agreement. A few people nodded. Lily continued. I'm grateful my family stood by me when I needed them most. And I hope we can all move forward now. Applause broke out. Loud. Earnest. She handed the microphone back to my father and returned to her seat, eyes bright with triumph. As she passed me, she leaned in and whispered, Don't ruin this. My father cleared his throat and looked at me. Daniel. Every eye in the room turned my way. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my chest. My mother watched me with that same hopeful smile, the one that begged me to say the right thing. To make this easy, to confirm the story they'd all just applauded. I took the microphone. For a second, I said nothing. Then I noticed something else. Whispers rippling through the room. People glancing at their phones. Confused looks passing between a few relatives near the windows. Someone's screen lit up again. And again. Lily noticed it too. Her smile faded as she followed their gazes. She pulled out her phone, frowned, and then looked up at me. Really looked at me this time, with something dangerously close to panic in her eyes. That's when my cousin Jenna whispered, not quietly enough. Wait, is this about what happened at the firm? Lily stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. What are you talking about? She snapped. The room froze. I tightened my grip on the microphone, heart pounding, and realized the breaking point wasn't coming. It was already here. For a moment after Lily snapped, no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting, where everyone senses something is wrong, but doesn't yet know how bad it's about to get. I was still standing there with the microphone in my hand, my pulse loud enough that I thought others might hear it. My parents were staring at Lily now, not at me. That alone felt surreal. My father recovered first. He cleared his throat sharply and said, "Everyone, let's take a breath. This isn't the time for what?" Lily cut in, her voice pitched higher than I'd ever heard it. For rumors? Because that's exactly what this is. She turned, scanning the room like she could intimidate people into silence. You shouldn't be spreading things you don't understand. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Phones slipped back into pockets, but the damage was already done. I could see it on their faces. Curiosity had replaced politeness. Whatever had popped up on those screens had cracked something open. I lowered the microphone without speaking and handed it back to my father. My mother grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. Lily was still standing, breathing hard, eyes darting between me and the people she suddenly didn't control anymore. I didn't stay for the rest of it. That might sound dramatic, but it wasn't. I just felt done. I nodded once to my parents, turned, and walked out. No speech, no defense, no explanation. Behind me, the noise resumed in an uneven wave. Murmurs, half questions, someone calling Lily's name. The doors closed softly behind me, muting it all. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. Mostly, I felt hollow, like something had finally finished burning itself out. On the drive home, memories I hadn't let myself touch in 2 years started surfacing, uninvited. The weeks after I was cut off had been worse than I ever admitted to anyone. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that emotions would cool, that logic would eventually win. I sent a few careful texts explaining my side. None were answered. Then came the practical consequences. My mother canceled the family phone plan without telling me. My father removed me from the shared insurance policy. An aunt I'd once helped move houses blocked me on social media. The message was clear. I wasn't just wrong. I was inconvenient. I remember sitting on my apartment floor one night, staring at the wall, realizing I had no one to call if something went wrong. No safety net. No fallback. That realization was terrifying in a quiet, adult way. It wasn't panic. It was the understanding that if I fell, I would hit the ground alone. And for a while, I did fall. I stopped sleeping properly. I went through the motions at work, but couldn't focus. I replayed that final dinner over and over, wondering if there had been a better way to say what I said. If I could have phrased it differently. Softer. Kinder. As if honesty had a tone that made it less threatening. I started questioning myself. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe protecting the family image was just how things worked. That doubt was the worst part. Worse than being lonely. Worse than being angry. Because it made me complicit in my own erasure. The turning point didn't come with some dramatic epiphany. It came with exhaustion. One night, months after the cutoff, I realized I was spending more energy justifying my existence to people who weren't listening than I was building a life for myself. That felt wrong. So I stopped trying to explain. I muted names. I archived emails I kept rereading. I redirected my attention to things that responded predictably to effort. Work was the first thing that stabilized. I took on extra projects. Not to impress anyone, but because the structure helped. My manager noticed. Opportunities followed. I didn't brag about it to anyone because there was no one left to brag to. That turned out to be freeing. Progress felt purer when it wasn't being measured against family expectations. I moved cities quietly. No announcement. No goodbye tour. Just a new lease, a smaller circle, and fewer ghosts. I started running in the mornings, cooking real meals, sleeping through the night. I made friends who knew nothing about my sister or my parents, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't anyone's supporting character. Still, the past had a way of catching up when I least expected it. About a year after the cutoff, I ran into an old colleague of Lily's at a conference. We recognized each other vaguely and ended up talking over coffee. At some point, my name came up. Her expression changed, not shocked, but cautious. "I didn't realize you were related," she said slowly. "Yeah," I replied. "It's complicated." She hesitated, then said, "I guess I should say, I'm sorry. About everything." I asked what she meant. She told me then. Not dramatically, just facts. About an internal investigation that never made it public. About missing documentation. About how blame had landed conveniently on someone junior who didn't have the right connections. About how questions were quietly buried once the optics became uncomfortable. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend anyone. I just listened. When she finished, I felt something shift, not satisfaction, not vindication, but clarity. The thing I'd been punished for had never been a misunderstanding. It had been a threat. My silence after the cutoff hadn't protected Lily's reputation. It had protected everyone else from accountability. I thanked her for telling me. We parted politely. I sat alone afterward, staring at my coffee as it went cold, and realized I finally believed myself. From there, rebuilding took on a different texture. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about self-respect. I saved more aggressively. I learned about mortgages. I stopped renting emotional space to people who hadn't earned it. When I bought my house, I didn't tell anyone in my family because I didn't need their approval to feel grounded. I invited friends over instead. We laughed on the floor of the living room like kids, eating pizza off cardboard. It felt earned. And yet, despite all that progress, I never went public with what I knew. Not out of fear, out of choice. I understood something my family never had. Truth doesn't need to shout to be real. Sometimes it just waits. Which is why the reunion unsettled me so much. Because suddenly, the past I'd carefully compartmentalized was standing in front of me again, louder and messier than ever. I didn't orchestrate those whispers at the reunion. I didn't send anyone anything. I hadn't planned exposure. The information existed on its own now, detached from me. And Lily knew it. By the time I got home that night, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from my mother. A text from my father asking where I'd gone. Messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly curious, suddenly sympathetic. One message stood out, a short one from my aunt. "We need to talk. There are things we didn't know." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on my couch in the quiet house I'd built for myself and felt the weight of a different kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes when the ground shifts under everyone else, but you're already standing on solid footing. I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because the moment Lily realized she couldn't control the story anymore, she was going to fight back. And my parents, caught between the daughter they'd protected and the son they'd discarded, were about to make choices that would reveal exactly who they were willing to sacrifice next. That realization didn't scare me. It prepared me. The morning after the reunion, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was anxious, but because my mind was unusually clear. That alone told me something had changed. For 2 years, I'd been reacting, recovering, rebuilding, insulating myself from the damage my family had done. Now, for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was anticipating movement. My phone was still face down on the nightstand. I left it there while I made coffee, watching steam curl up toward the ceiling of the kitchen I'd paid for with my own money, in a house no one could threaten to take away from me. The silence felt earned. When I finally checked my messages, there were more than I'd expected. Not frantic yet, but trending that way. My mother had left 2 voicemails. The first was controlled, careful. She said she was concerned about how things ended and wanted to talk as a family. The second was less composed. She asked if I'd known about those allegations beforehand and why I hadn't warned them. That word, warned, stuck with me. Not apologized. Not explained. Warned. As if the real mistake was failing to protect them from embarrassment. My father hadn't called again, but he'd sent a single text. "We need to meet." Just us. Then there were the others. Cousins. Aunts. Even one uncle who'd cut me off completely 2 years earlier. The tone was consistent. Surprise, confusion, concern. A few asked directly what had happened back then. Others danced around it, testing the water, seeing how much I'd say. I didn't respond right away. I let the messages sit, not to punish anyone, but because I needed to understand the new terrain before stepping into it. By midday, something else became clear. Lily hadn't reached out at all. That told me more than any angry message could have. Silence, in her case, wasn't calm, it was strategy. She was regrouping. I spent the next few days doing something that would have shocked my past self. I talked to people. Selectively. Carefully. I returned a few calls, not to vent or accuse, but to listen. I asked open-ended questions and said very little about my own experience. I wanted to know what they had heard, what version of events they'd been living with for the past 2 years. The answers varied in detail, but not in shape. Lily had been wronged. I'd been emotional. The situation had been complicated. My parents had framed my departure as a dramatic choice I made out of pride. No one mentioned the ultimatum. No one mentioned the expectation that I lie. No one mentioned the professional fallout Lily had narrowly avoided. That omission mattered. As I listened, I started noticing who was genuinely shaken by the reunion and who was simply annoyed. Some relatives were embarrassed they'd repeated a story without questioning it. Others were defensive, eager to justify why they hadn't reached out to me. A few, quietly, admitted they'd always felt something didn't add up but hadn't wanted to challenge my parents. Those were the people I paid attention to. One of them was my aunt, the same one who'd texted me that night. We met for coffee later that week. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that comes from carrying other people's secrets. She didn't waste time. "Your mother told us you refused to help," she said softly. "Not that you were asked to lie, just that you wouldn't support Lily when she needed it." I nodded. "That sounds right." She stared into her cup for a long moment. "What actually happened, Daniel?" I told her. Not dramatically, not defensively, just the facts, laid out in order, without commentary. I watched her expression change as pieces clicked into place. When I finished, she let out a long breath. "They let you take the fall," she said. "Yes," I replied. "They did." That conversation repeated itself in different forms over the next week. Each time, I shared a little more. Never everything. Never with anger. I'd learned something important during my rebuild. Restraint gives credibility. I wasn't trying to convince anyone. I was giving them enough truth to confront their own assumptions. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Lily was scrambling. I didn't know that at first. I only noticed the effects. Her social media went dark. Mutual acquaintances started acting oddly formal when they reached out, asking how I was doing in a way that felt like reconnaissance. Then one evening, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from her. It started politely. Too politely. "We should talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I don't like how things unfolded at the reunion." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. When I did, I kept it brief. "I agree. There's been a misunderstanding for a while." She replied almost instantly. "I don't know what people think they know, but I never meant for things to go this far." There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just distance from consequences. I didn't respond after that. The next message came an hour later, longer this time. She talked about stress, about pressure, about how hard it had been to carry everything alone. She implied, without stating outright, that if I'd handled things differently back then, none of this would have happened. It was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. I saved the messages, not because I planned to use them, but because I'd learned the value of keeping records when dealing with people who rewrite history. A few days later, my father showed up at my house unannounced. I watched him from the window before opening the door, noting how he stood, rigid, hands clasped, jaw tight. He'd always been a man who believed authority came from posture. When I opened the door, his eyes flicked past me, taking in the space. The furniture. The quiet confidence of ownership. "You didn't tell us you bought a house," he said, as if that were the real offense. "I didn't think it was relevant," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table. He declined coffee. His hands stayed folded, like he was afraid of touching anything. He told me my mother was distraught. He said Lily was not doing well. He said the family was concerned about narratives getting out of control. I listened without interrupting. Finally, he said, "If you knew about these issues back then, you should have come to us privately." I met his eyes. I did. He frowned. "You didn't explain it clearly." I explained it honestly. That was when his tone shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. "You have to understand," he said. "Your sister had more to lose." There it was. The truth they'd never meant to say out loud. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded slowly. And now, he hesitated. Now, people are asking questions. After he left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, replaying that sentence. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified everything. The family wasn't upset about what Lily had done. They were upset about losing control of the story. And control, once cracked, doesn't come back easily. That was when I realized I didn't need to expose anything. I just needed to stop protecting them. Over the next couple of weeks, I let conversations unfold naturally. When people asked direct questions, I answered them. When they didn't, I didn't volunteer. I didn't correct every false statement, but I never reinforced one. I allowed silence to do its work. Information has a way of traveling when it's no longer being actively suppressed. And it traveled fast. I started hearing about meetings Lily was being excluded from, about colleagues distancing themselves, about opportunities quietly evaporating. None of it traced back to me. I hadn't contacted her workplace. I hadn't leaked documents. The truth had simply reached enough people that ignoring it became inconvenient. My parents noticed the shift too. Invitations stopped coming in pairs. Calls went unanswered. For the first time, they were on the outside of conversations they used to control. And they hated it. One evening, my mother called again. Her voice was tight, controlled in that brittle way that comes before something breaks. "Daniel," she said, "we need to fix this." As a family, I asked one question. "Fix what?" She didn't answer right away. In that pause, I understood something else. They still thought reconciliation was the goal. That this was all leverage toward restoring the old hierarchy, just with fewer rough edges. They hadn't realized yet that I wasn't negotiating for a seat at their table. I was deciding whether they'd ever be allowed in my house. And the timing, whether by chance or design, was almost perfect. Because the family event my parents were now desperate to control, the one they'd asked me to help smooth over, was approaching fast. Bigger than the reunion. More public. More symbolic. A moment where silence would no longer be an option. I didn't know yet exactly what I would say, or if I'd say anything at all. But for the first time, I understood the power of choosing when to speak. And I wasn't going to waste it. The event my parents had been quietly panicking about was my grandmother's 80th birthday. In our family, that wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance. Extended relatives, old family friends, former business partners, people who remembered everyone before the stories got edited. My parents had been planning it for months, and Lily was supposed to give a speech. Symbolic. Poetic. Proof that everything was fine. A week before the party, my mother called and asked if I would attend. Not begged. Asked. That alone told me how much the ground had shifted. "I'll be there," I said, "but I won't promise silence." She swallowed audibly on the other end of the line. "We just don't want surprises." I didn't say it, but we both knew the irony. The night of the birthday, the venue was elegant in a way that screamed careful planning. Soft lighting, polished wood floors, a hired pianist in the corner. My grandmother sat near the front, smiling, blissfully unaware of the tension humming beneath the surface. When I walked in, conversations paused again, but this time there was no awkward politeness. Just attention. People nodded at me. A few smiled. Some looked relieved. My parents noticed immediately. My father stiffened. My mother forced a smile and hurried over, touching my arm like she used to when she wanted to remind me who I belonged to. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I came for Grandma," I replied. Lily was already there, dressed impeccably, posture rigid. She barely glanced at me. I could tell she'd been warned. She stayed close to our parents, like proximity alone could protect her. Dinner passed without incident, though the air felt stretched thin. Then the speeches began. My father went first. He talked about family legacy, about resilience, about standing together when things get difficult. It was polished, familiar. Lily followed. Her speech was shorter than planned. Careful. She avoided specifics, leaned heavily on gratitude. I noticed she never once mentioned accountability or truth. Just love. Just moving forward. Then my uncle, one of the few who'd reached out to me earlier, stood and surprised everyone by saying, "Daniel should speak." A murmur rippled through the room. My mother turned pale. My father opened his mouth to object, then stopped. Too many eyes. Too many people already suspicious of control. I stood. I didn't bring notes. I didn't bring documents. I didn't bring proof, because I didn't need to. By then, most of the room already knew something was wrong. I just needed to stop lying for them. I wasn't going to speak tonight, I began calmly. This isn't about me. It's about my grandmother, and I love her very much. I paused, letting that settle. But I also won't sit here while silence keeps doing damage. I didn't look at Lily. I looked at the room. 2 years ago, I was asked to lie. Not to protect my family, just to protect an image. When I refused, I was told I was choosing against them. My voice didn't shake. So I was removed. Quietly. Completely. I saw my mother press her lips together. My father stared straight ahead. I stayed silent because I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And I found it. I rebuilt my life without any help from the people who raised me. I smiled slightly. It turns out that when you stop absorbing other people's consequences, you can stand up straight. A few people nodded. My grandmother looked confused but attentive. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I don't need to. The truth has already done what truth does. I finally looked at Lily then, not with anger, but with finality. But I won't accept being labeled the problem anymore. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Complete. I set the microphone down and returned to my seat. No one applauded. They didn't need to. The fallout was immediate and irreversible. Within weeks, Lily lost the last of the professional ground she'd been desperately clinging to. Nothing dramatic. No headlines. Just distance. Invitations stopped. Trust evaporated. The people who once shielded her decided it wasn't worth the risk anymore. She moved cities shortly after. No farewell posts. No announcements. My parents tried to salvage what they could. They invited me to talk things through. They framed it as reconciliation. I framed it as accountability. I met them once more. Neutral space. Public. They apologized, but only halfway. Enough to soothe themselves. Not enough to matter. I declined further contact. Some relatives drifted away. Others stepped closer. I didn't chase either group. I learned that family isn't proven by proximity. It's proven by behavior under pressure. My grandmother called me a month later. She said she was proud of me. That was enough. Now, when I sit in my living room at night, the quiet doesn't feel empty. It feels owned. I didn't destroy my sister's reputation. I just stopped carrying it for her. And that made all the difference.